Hello and welcome to the second part of this lab, Introduction to Logo and Text Animation in After Effects with me, Eran Stern. In the previous part, we learned how to import a multi-layered Illustrator file and build a composition out of it. We also converted vectors to shape layers, extruded and textured them, and then set up this semi-transparent logo with 3 colorful slices. Now in this part, we will make our composition more appealing by adding lights, reflections, and camera movement, as well as bringing the 3D logo to life by animating some of its parts. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's roll our sleeves and begin. Before we start, make sure that you have a copy of the exercise files as well as the workbook, the PDF that I've prepared for you. And I've already expanded these files. I'm going to double click on this folder here on my desktop, and we can see that we have 3 After Effects project files. We're going to start our journey in this part from Max Stinger number 1. But if you want to reverse engineer, this is the last step. So this is the final result of this part. You can always double click and reverse engineer it. However, what I would like you to do is just identify the first After Effects project and double click on it, and this is going to launch After Effects and show you the state that we left off in the previous part. So just as a quick reminder, what we have here is a couple of layers that we've extruded as well as a 3D floor. And just to show you what we've managed to create, I'm going to click over here where it says Active Camera and switch to Custom View 1. This will allow us to see the view from another 3D perspective without harming the existing camera. I'm going to also press C, and this is going to initiate the new orbit tool, which is sensitive to where you are clicking. So if I'm going to click over here, I'm going to orbit around this axis. If I'm going to click over here, it's going to do this from this point. So just be mindful when you are doing this. Now, this is just a working view. We are not going to use this. So for now, I'm just going to switch back to the active camera. And what I would like to do now is to actually create a camera in this scene as well as animate it. Now, like in real life, animating a real camera, it's a little bit difficult. So we're going to use a gimbal, also known as a camera orbit null. And to create this, first we need to select the composition. I'm going to switch back to the selection tool, go to the layer menu, and first let's create our camera. So under layer, new camera, I'll select the 35mm preset, making sure that the type is set to 2-node camera, and I'm going to say OK. Next, I'm going to right-click on the camera that I've just created, and from the camera options, I'll create an orbit null. This will create a transparent 3D null object in the composition. It will also name it Camera 1 Orbit Null. It will make it the parent of the camera, so you can see that there is a relationship between those 2 elements. And all the geometry properties of this null will be inherited by the camera. Animating this null is going to be much more easier and more accurate than animating the camera itself. So make sure that this null is selected and you are at the first frame, and then press R to see the orientation and rotation. I'm going to start by setting a Y rotation angle. So let's go with 70 degrees here in the first frame, as well as create a keyframe for this value. Now I'll click on the timecode area here and type in 400. And this is going to take my orbit null to 4 seconds. Now, just so we'll see what we are doing, I'm going to switch back to Custom View 1, which will give us an indication of where the camera here, as well as the animation that we are going to apply for it. So assuming the null is still selected, I'm going to highlight the Y rotation value, and this time I'll type in 40 degrees. And you can see that it is actually going to take the camera and spin it from 70 degrees to 40 degrees on its Y-axis. Now I'm also going to use this camera orbit null to position the camera in a better spot here in this scene. So I'll select it again, and then I'll hold down the Shift key and press P, which is going to show us the position values as well. So the only thing that I would like to do is just change the X position. I'm going to highlight the first value here and type in 800. And you can see how this works. You can see that this null, which is here in the middle of the scene, is controlling the camera and giving us the desired result. Now, to see it from the camera perspective, we'll need to return to this pull-down menu and choose again active camera, or you can also choose camera 1. Now, if you want to see the camera animation that we've created, we can just press spacebar. Now, I want to remind you before pressing spacebar that we are still using the fast draft preview quality, which means that we are not seeing everything that there is to see in this scene. We are just going to use it for preview purposes. But we can see that it actually works quite nice. Excellent. Now we're going to add 3 different lights. And I'm going to give you some specific values that I know works best here. And I came up with these values by trial and error. So feel free to experiment with your own values. I just want to save some time and help you to light the scene and make it more beautiful. So let's go to the beginning so we can see everything. I'm also going to close the camera orbit null, return to the layer menu, and under new, I'm going to add a new light. Our first light is going to be a spotlight, which should be the default After Effects light. I'm not going to touch any of these settings, but I will enable cast shadows. And I'm also going to change the shadow diffusion to 20 pixels. I'm going to use this light and place it above our 3D logo. But for now, I'm just going to say OK and create it in this default place. Next, I'll return to the layer menu again. I'll choose new and I'll add yet another light. This one will be a parallel light, and we don't want to cast shadows from this one. We actually only want shadows from our original spotlight. So all you need to do is just make sure that this cast shadows is disabled and click OK. Next, I'm going to go again to the same menu. And of course, you can also use the keyboard shortcut Command-Shift-Option-L. Here on the Mac, this will be Control-Shift-Alt-L on the Windows side. So let's add another light. This one will be a point light. So these 3 different lights will give us different results and will create a basic 3 light setup. So in this case, once again, just make sure that Cast Shadows is disabled and click OK. Alright, so now it's time to place the lights in the scene. Once again, to save some time, I'm going to give you the desired values. So let's start with this spotlight. Make sure to select it and then open its settings. So I'm going to start by changing the position and then matching the point of interest so it will basically cast its light from up and above. So I'm not going to touch the X position, but I will change the Y position. I want to raise it above the logo. So I'll type in -2000, and this is going to bring it up and above. I'm also going to change the Z to 200. Once again, I played with those values, so I know that they are going to work very nicely here. I'm also going to change the point of interest, leaving the X as is, but changing the Y to the same value that I've just chosen. So -2000, and we don't need to touch the Z. All right, now I'm going to change the X rotation because I want this light to point down. So I'm just going to highlight this and type in -90 to set it to 90 degrees. All right, we're going to see the result in a moment, but for now, let's just move on and set other parameters for the other lights. We don't need to touch the parallel light. The default position is actually working quite nicely. You can see where it is in the scene. It's shading its light over here. And by the way, we can also move the cursor. Let's go to 2 seconds, just so we'll have an average place between the beginning and the end animation. All right, now let's return to the timeline, select point light number 1, and I'm going to just press P because I only need to worry about its position. I'm going to change the X to -120 and then tab to the Y. This one wants to be 200. And finally, the Z will be -50. And now just to fill in more lights for the logo itself, so it will be a little bit more brighter in the right side, I'll select the light, I'll go to the edit menu and I'll duplicate another copy. Now lights are additive in After Effects, so they are adding to the intensity of what we already have. This means that I want to change a couple of the values here. I'll collapse these values for the first point light, and then I'll drill down the second one, which is now layer number 1, point light number 2. And then I'll open the transform and change the position. So this one wants to be 2000 pixels for the X. I'm going to leave 200 for the Y, but I'm going to send it -300 pixels on its Z axis. And then I'll open up the light options over here and I'll reduce the intensity to 80%, as well as change the fall off from none to smooth, which means that it will decay after 500 pixels. So this is something that you can do with lights in After Effects to art direct the scene. So this creates nice distributions of lights in the scene, making sure that we can see all the colors here. And now we need to take care of the shadows. So to make sure that we can see the shadows, we actually need to cast them. So we already took care of the shadows in terms of lights. I'm just going to double click on this spotlight one after closing the point light that I've just worked on, just to remind you that this light is casting shadows. However, we can't see any shadows on the floor. And this is because we need to tell the objects that we want to cast the shadows to do so. Now, most of them are over here inside this pre-composition. So what we need to do is double click on this M-3D comp and then select all the layers by pressing Command or Control A, and then tap twice on the letter A, so AA in sequence. And this is going to show you the geometry options as well as the material options for everything. Now, since everything is selected, whatever we are going to do for one of these is going to be rippled through the entire group. So I'm just going to make sure that under cast shadows, instead of off, it is set to on. Now, we're not going to see anything in this composition, but if we're going to return to the main one, the max elements, we should now see shadows casting on the floor. All right, so now what we want to do is make sure that the floor is going to also be reflective. Now, currently, I just want to remind you that we are still using the fast draft mode, which is downgrading the resolution just to make things more snappier in real time. But if you want to actually see the soft shadows as well as the reflections that we are going to apply, make sure to change it to either off in parentheses final quality or adaptive resolution, which is going to try and catch up with you when you are moving your cursor. So this is what I'm going to do. I'll change it to adaptive resolution just to check the nice soft shadows on the floor. And then I'll select the floor and I'm going to make the floor reflective. And you can do it either by pressing AA in sequence as I showed you before, or if you want, you can open the settings and then open up the material options and then change the reflection intensity from 0 to whatever you want. So just to show you how this works, I'm going to set it all the way to 100%. This is obviously way too much to what we need. So let's just reduce it to 30% and it's going to give us nice reflection. However, we do need to work with the other settings here to make it appear a little bit more modest. So we're not going to swallow all of the light. And the most important thing that will help us here is to reduce the metal qualities from 100% to 0. And this is going to change the appearance of this surface. And I'm also going to make it less sensitive to lights. Actually, I'm going to tell it to not accept lights at all, which is another thing that you can do, not in real life, but here in After Effects. So near the words accept lights, I'm going to click it once, and this is going to switch off the light acceptance of this floor, making it more in line with all the blue tints and background that we already have in the scene. And I think this works much better. Now let's do some housekeeping. So I'm going to close all the layers, and then I'm going to move my cursor to 323 by typing in 323 here in the timecode field. And then I'm going to select all of the lights as well as the camera orbit null and the camera itself. So in other words, click on this layer, hold down Shift and click on the camera layer, and then hold down Command or Control and click on the floor layer. So these are all the layers that we want to trim. Now make sure again that you are at 323 and all of these layers are selected. Then hold down the Option key here on the Mac. This will be the Alt on Windows, and tap the closing bracket to trim all of these layers to this point, because we only want to calculate these layers at the beginning part of this composition. What I'm also going to do is select layer number 7 and 8, the Max logo and tag, and just drag them above all the rest, because these are the layers that we're going to tackle in a later time. And now, to add more interest to the scene, we are going to animate those 3 colorful slices, and we're going to do it using parenting. Okay, so to make things a bit more snappier, we are going to return to the fast draft preview mode, and then make sure that nothing is selected just by clicking somewhere in the gray portion of the timeline. And I'm also going to go to the beginning. Now, what I would like to do is select layer number 9, M-Fill 3, then hold down Shift and select the layer underneath, M-Fill 2. And I want to use this parent and link column to marry them to the layer underneath, so M-Fill number 1. And you can do it using this peak whip. So just drag and point to the layer that you want to be the father or the parent. And now we can control everything using only one set of keyframes. So what I would like to do is move everything together, and just to test that it is working, the relationship, I'm going to hover on top of this blue axis, the Z1, and I'm just going to drag everything together. The plan is to make sure that they are entering the screen from here, and then create some sort of a bounce, and then fly all the way outside of the screen. All right, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm not moving anything. So I'll undo the movement that I just created. And then I'll press P while layer 11 is selected, and this is going to show me the position properties. Now I want more control. I only need to worry about the Z axis as I showed you. So I don't want to animate X or Y. And if this is the situation, what you can do in After Effects is right click on the word position and choose separate dimensions. And this is going to give you 3 sets of keyframes that can be controlled individually, which is going to work perfect for this kind of animation. So what I would like to do now is select only the Z position. This is the one that I'm going to affect. And then I'll move 10 frames into the future, and I'll start to drag this value until everything is going to be outside of the screen. Now I can continue to drag, or I can, as always, give you the winning numbers. So let's just highlight this field and type in -1400, which is going to move all of these 3 groups safely outside of the screen. And then let's also create a keyframe for this Z position. Then I want to go 10 frames forward. So there are a couple of ways to work. The obvious one is to just highlight this value and type in 20. You can also press Shift page down if you have access to an extended keyboard, or Command or Control Shift and the right arrow. And this is also going to move your cursor 10 frames forward. Now I'm going to highlight this value again, and I'll change it to 150, which is going to bring it into this transparent shell and a little bit of an overshoot as well. And then I'll move 10 frames forward. This time I'll press Shift and page down, and I'll change this value to -100. And this is going to take it the other way around. Then I'll click over here and marquee these last two keyframes and then copy them to memory. And then I'll move 10 frames forward. So you can either go to 116 or again press Shift and page down. And then when you are here, press Command or Control V to paste these two keyframes. And then we need to move 20 frames further. So Shift page down twice and paste another set of these keyframes. So now if you want to see what we've created, let's go to the beginning, press spacebar, and you can get a sense of this bouncy animation. Now it's not really bouncy, it's just going back and forth. So what we want to do is create some sort of a bounce. And we can do it using the graph editor. So click on the graph editor, and now you will be entered to this view, which is going to show you how these keyframes are working. And we can see that they are using a linear interpolation. The lines are straight. So I want you to click on the words Z position. This is going to highlight everything here. And then click on this icon, Easy Ease, to add some arcs, some smoothness to this motion. Now what I want you to do is click somewhere over here to deselect your selection and then marquee only on the first 6 keyframes. So we don't want to select the first one. We only want these 6 last keyframes because we want to control this bounding box and create some sort of a distortion, which will effectively be a bounce. So to work precisely here, what I would like you to do is click on this magnifying glass to dismiss the auto zoom option, and then go and select the regular zoom tool of After Effects and click here once and maybe even another time, so twice. Then use this scroller to make sure that you can see and access all of these keyframes up and close. Then let's switch back to the regular selection tool. Hold down Command and Option if you're working on the Mac. This will be Control and Alt on the PC side. And then grab one of the right points of this transform box and start to move it towards the thick line. This is the 0 line. Now, what we need to do is actually marry those 2 points. So make sure that they are fused together. Something like this should work. Then what I would like you to do is switch back to the regular keyframe view by clicking again on the graph editor. That's it. We no longer need its services. And then let's just zoom out so we can see what we are doing. Make sure that nothing is selected, because currently a couple of keyframes are selected. So just click somewhere and then use this option, the Go to Previous Keyframe button, to go and be on top of the last keyframe here, highlight it and type in 0 to make sure that the last point here will be exactly inside the hollow shell. And now to check what we've managed to create, let's go to the beginning, press spacebar, and you can see this nice bounce, which is now basically settling down. So I pressed spacebar again because there's nothing to preview from 4 seconds and onward. And now I want to create the exit animation. So I'll highlight the timecode area, and then I'll type in 3112 to go to this specific timecode. And then I'll click on this diamond add or remove keyframe at current time. And this is going to add another keyframe with the same value. So both of these are 0, meaning that from this point to this point, we will have no animation whatsoever. Now let's move to 317, so 5 frames forward, and we are going to create some overshoot. So I'm going to highlight this value, type in -200, to bring these three slices forward and closer to us before they will swiftly leave the screen, and they are going to do so at 3 to 3. So let's type in this value, and just to save you some time, instead of just scrubbing it, let's just type in 7,000, which is going to send it all the way over here. And again, just to see how this works, I'm going to press spacebar from the beginning, and we can get a sense of what we've created. All right, now let's zoom out. Let's go to the beginning. I'm going to close everything, and I want to make sure that I can also see the shadows and the reflections from these three colorful blocks. So let's just park our cursor at 16 frames and then return to the adaptive resolution preview. We can see that indeed we have a reflection, but we are missing the shadows. And this is because we need to enable the shadows for layer 9, 10, and 11. So shift select them, then press AA in sequence to show their material options. Scroll down and make sure that cast shadows is switched on. And after a moment or so, you will see shadows on the floor as well as inside those shapes, which is going to give this a much better and more professional look. Now let's go to the beginning and let's preview what we did by pressing spacebar. Now bear in mind that this is going to take longer to process because we are adding shadows and reflections to the mix. So what you can do to help After Effects is to drag the work area endpoint and make sure that it is only previewing the first 4 seconds. Now, if this will stop your preview, then you'll need to initiate it again by pressing spacebar. And this is it for part number 2. So in this part, we learned how to add camera, lights, shadows, and reflections to the scene. And we also use parenting to animate a couple of layers at once. Then we've created a bouncing animation with the help of the graph editor. Now I know it's a lot to take in, but luckily you can recap using the recording as well as the workbook. But if you made it this far, I'm proud of you. However, this is not the end. We have a third and final part when we are going to animate the packshot by using shape layers operators, and I'm also going to show you how to use per character text animation. We're also going to apply some color effects and transitions, and you don't want to miss it. So I hope you will tune in and join me, and I want to thank you for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye and take care.